Today we are talking about all the ways that you can color your resin dice. Now there are 4 main ways, but some other alternative ways, and we'll talk about all of these. First up though is what you're likely to find as a brand new beginner, alcohol ink. Alcohol ink is a great way to make these transparent colored dice, like this little red guy here. I did use that cherry. You can get them in flat colors or in metallics. I've got a few of both. The problem with alcohol inks is that they are alcohol based and they are not made for resin. So they tend to burn out, specifically purple here, and they turn this like orangey color. But there's another way to make great transparent colored dice like this guy here, and that is resin dye or pigment. These here are made for resin, and I'm not sure why I'm holding these upside down, but the pigments are, as I said, made for resin. They're oil-based, unlike the alcohol inks, so they are a little heavier. More on that in a minute. But as you can see from the side of the box here, they're made for epoxy resin. They have a high concentration, so you don't need a whole lot, and they're crystal clear. So you can get these in transparent colors and opaque colors. This one here was made with, let me see. Here's this turquoise color here. And so you can see they're pretty true to the color. A little bit goes a long way. I think I used 2 drops maybe in 30 milliliters of resin. So a very little bit goes a long way. And as you can see, as I move my finger underneath, you could actually see like right through my fingers, to my fingers. So this is a great way to make these highly pigmented colors without risking burning it out and or deconcentrating your resin so that it doesn't cure properly. This here is another example of what they're great for, because as I mentioned, they're oil based. They're a little heavier, so that swirly goodness in there is a little bit easier to achieve. Put a little dot on a toothpick and swirl it around, which is what I did here. And it, as you can see, is pretty evenly dispersed throughout the die. It's not floating on one end. It's pretty much all the way through there. And just for comparison, here is a alcohol ink Petri that didn't go well. I used the wrong sinker ink, but it's all on the top there, pretty much all on the top. And I'll flip it here in a second to the top face, which is all the green and the white. And you have to be careful with that because it can mess up the cure of your dye and you end up with a soft face, which isn't usually a problem with the resin dyes when you're using those, but you wouldn't want to use that for a Petri anyway. The point being that they sink a lot easier. This here is a dye set made with an opaque color of resin dye. So the white is an opaque and the swirls in there were alcohol ink that I dirty poured. And I'm going to make some dice with these later, so you'll get to see them in action with a few techniques. But we're mostly focused on the colors and how those turn out. So you can get them in opaque there. That's just what I was showing you, was that they're opaque. And here's the white that I used to make that set. So again, you can see a little bit goes a long way. I think I used 2 drops, maybe 3 again in 30 milliliters of resin. Now here is the other most common way to color dice that you'll see, and that's mica powder. So I've got my chameleon chilling on top there and a whole mess of others. They're pretty easy to use, but they are a powder. So you want to make sure you wear your respirator when you're using these because it's floaty. So let me just open this up here and you can take a looky-loo. There you can see little powderies. You don't want to use a lot. You'll notice off to the side there, I've got these tiny little spoons next to my tweezers, and that's what I use when I put those in my dice. So these here are 2 different sets to demonstrate the opacity. This one used a lot and this one I used a little. So you can get sparkly transparent colors or you can get really opaque colors with these, and it just depends on how much you use to color your dice. There is one other way to color dice I don't have on hand yet, but we're going to explore some alternative ways first. This is tempera powder used to make tempera paint. It functions essentially just like mica powder. I tested it out and made a couple of sets, and as you can see, the green came out very green and the yellow came out very yellow. So you can think outside the box when coloring dice sometimes as well. Now, one other way that you can color dice with no color is foil and glitter. If you put enough, or even sometimes just a little bit, it will tint the resin from the reflection. Sometimes the color on it actually will rub off or wash off rather into the dice. So with glitter though, you want to make sure you use the fine glitter. As I was turning it there, the heavy glitter will sink. So here's a set where the blue half is foil and the other yellowy green half is glitter. As you can see, it looks like they have some kind of a tint, but they don't. And this set here is just 3 different colors of foil. So you can color them, and you can't see the air quotations, but there are air quotes happening here with just foil and glitter. This one here, though, is an example of what I was talking about with the glitter. You can see it's all sunk to the bottom there. I used one that was too heavy. And on the top here is the alcohol ink and how it floats. So alcohol ink, this metallic one here, has really fine, sparkly particles in it, like mica. And with the alcohol, it floats it to the top. But as you can see, the heavier glitter sinks right to the bottom. So you want to be mindful of how large a chunk, whatever it is you're putting in your die is, because it will sink. So let's make some dice here. Today, I first need to gear up. Always wear your gloves. Always, always, always wear your nitrile gloves and your respirator. You can't see me putting that on. I did it. I promise. Today, I'm using NASUBI Resin, and so I'm just going to pour out a whole bunch here. We're going to make, let's see, count the cups here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 or 6 sets, I think we end up making. And then I am going to make a second batch with the other way to color dice, which is resin pigment paste. And we'll talk all about that when it pops up. But first, we're just going to mix up some resin here and make sure that we have it really, really well mixed. It's something that you don't want to play around with. So if you're watching this because you're new to making dice and trying to figure out how to color them, let's just talk about mixing resin for a second. It is really, really important to mix your resin well. It's one of the top causes of improperly cured dice. So I do use an electric mixer because mixing by hand hurts my hands, and I don't do it if I don't have to. So I picked up this little bad boy, and as you can see, even though it's doing the work, I still move it around. I'm making sure to rub it against the side so that it's scraping everything off of there as well. I'm moving it up and down, tilting it at angles, and it does turn in both directions, clockwise and counterclockwise. So I will rotate or alternate rather, which button I'm pressing so that it rotates in different directions. And then we are going to make our first set with resin pigment. But before I do that, I'm gonna grab my little hand tool here. They're just coffee stirrers, and I did pick this up from somebody else. So I wish I could remember who it was. If you happen to be that person and you're watching this, thank you. You're a lifesaver. You want to scrape off anything that might not be mixed in, either part A or part B off of the side, to make sure that it gets well mixed in. And you can see I'm kind of rubbing it on the bottom there and making sure that anything that might have been missed by the electric mixer, either the motion or the physical scraping of it, I'm trying to get mixed in now. Because if you're like me, you want to use every drop of your resin, and when you get to that last set, you will scrape the sides to get all of the resin out and into your dice, and you'll end up with parts that weren't mixed in well, and ultimately uncured dice, which is crappy. Nobody wants that. So then, as an extra preventative step, you can pour your resin into a second cup and mix it up in there, just to make sure that you've got everything really well mixed. And so I take the extra step of scraping the sides, and then I pour it into this secondary cup where I mix my colors, and not just because I'm using separate colors, but because I can also control how well things are mixed. And so this is the resin pigment. As you saw, I only used 1 drop. It also helps to see how well things are mixed up, so we can make sure that our resin is mixed well and will cure fully. And then I decided, just for funsies, why not? Let's throw in some foil. So this is a really simple set that you can make with just a little bit of color and a little bit of foil. And it's high impact, low effort, and we love dice like that. I'll have to make a video on how to make multiple sets like this and how to plan it out so that you can get all your sets done within your work window. And then I just take the extra resin in my cup there and pop it in my extra mold. So this set we're making with, I believe that was alcohol ink I dropped in there. And again, for funsies, let's just throw in some glitter. So another simple set of just alcohol ink and glitter. And this will show you the difference between how the resin resin pigment, no, there we go, resin dye colors versus the alcohol ink. Now this one here is a couple drops of resin dye, the transparent, with a couple of drops on top, or will be in a second here, of the opaque resin dye. And this is called a dirty pour for anyone who's new to dice making. And it works pretty well with the resin dyes because, as I mentioned, they're heavy and so they sink well into the dice as you pour. Sometimes they can be too heavy to float, but mixing another colorant into the resin helps dense it up a little bit, and it will generally float then. I haven't had too many issues with it. So this set here is another with the resin dye, and that was 3 drops. So you'll see how intense the purple color is of this when we demold it shortly. Because I had to wait 24 hours, but due to the magic of editing, you don't. So another, again, simple set of purple with the foil, and I love them. They're like my go-to when I can't think of what I want to make. So this one here is a mix of the resin dye, 2 drops, and a little bit of mica powder. So it's a way to control the amount of sparkle and opacity in 2 different methods. So I showed you earlier the fully solid colored dye that was just all sparkle because I used a lot of mica powder. This is another way to turn up the opacity so you can't see through it quite as much by using these solid, non-sparkly, opaque resin dyes and then adding mica to get it to your desired sparkle. And this set here is a mica powder set that we're going to dirty pour with some metallic alcohol ink. And this one will show the difference between how those distribute in your dice. And notice this is set, number 5? So we're way into my working time for my resin, where I'm almost at the honey stage. You can see me scraping it out there. It was starting to get just a hair thick, and that should impede things from moving around a lot. But when we demold, you'll see what happens. So this last set here is all mica powder. I'm going to use 2 different concentrations. I'm going to put the gold in the little cup and the silver in the big cup. So I used roughly the same amount for each one. I think I go back with a little bit more gold. But because the cup is smaller, it doesn't have as much area to distribute in, which makes it a lot more opaque and harder to see through. So then what I'm going to do with that is take it here and pour it into the syringe and then inject it. I do not like to use pipettes. I find them really hard to control, and this is a lot easier for me to work with, and I don't seem to get those pull out drags or tails as often as I do with a pipette. So I've switched. I use syringes. I'll do a whole video on this. Don't you worry. And you'll see how these swirl around in there real nicely from that syringe when we're done. Or as a user on Reddit likes to call them bloops. And then just a little bit more to top it off and kind of seal that gold in so it's not right on the top face there. It's kind of sandwiched in with the silver. So let's see what we've got here. Let's demold these dice and see how they turned out. First up, we've got that set of mica on mica. The silver, as you'll see in a second here when I stop pulling them out, is pretty opaque-ish. You can see through it at least, and the gold you cannot see through at all. So here's a really good demonstration of the different concentrations of mica powder and resin and how that turns out. And you can see it's all shimmery and it's really, really very, very pretty. This is our set with the resin dye and the gold flakes of what you call it? Foil. There we go. The resin dye with the gold foil, the simple, low effort, but very pretty set. And you can see how highly concentrated the color is. Really very beautiful. On to the next one. This is the resin dye and mica powder. If you remember, I used just a couple drops of the resin dye with a little bit of the mica powder so that it wasn't transparent, but I turned up the opaqueness a little bit with using that resin dye, and it came out this really very pretty, like ice shimmery blue. And my lights are really bright and close here, so it doesn't translate 100%, but so very pretty. This set here is the one that we did with the mica powder and the alcohol ink, and it was the dirty pour. So we did the alcohol ink on top, and you can really see once I bring these up close here how that ink distributed pretty much throughout the dye. On some of them, like this one here, you can see that it did kind of float, whereas the resin part of the dye sank, and that is common. So the ink there, just to keep in mind, is a little bit thinner than the dye and will distribute a little bit more like this. And you remember, this one was poured pretty late in the stages of my resin, so my resin was a little thick. Now compare that to this one, and also I'm a bad example there. Don't use sharp objects next to your molds. That's a bad idea. I don't know why I'm doing that. This is the resin dye with the resin dye dirty poured on top. So the white, I did just that 1 or 2 drips and then poured it, and you can see, come back. You can see how well that stayed striated and gave really nice defined swirls, whereas the previous one with the alcohol ink was really, really blended. Next up, we have the alcohol ink with the glitter, and again, just a simple set. And you can see when I pull this up close in a moment here and I'm done picking at all the flashing, how well that fine glitter distributed. And it's just a really light, transparent, pretty sparkly dye, and that's pretty typical of alcohol inks. Again, to note the concentration of color. And you can see here, as I get this a little bit closer, how that glitter distributed and how, oh God, get it right, there we go, and how light the color really is. So you have to use a lot of alcohol ink to get it to pigment really darkly. Now this was the resin dye and the foil, and it is pretty and simple. I'm still fighting with flashing. Just a note on flashing that sometimes it's easier to let it sit for a little bit longer and it'll snap off a lot easier. I am impatient and I can remove these after about 10 hours in the pressure pot, so it's a little softer. But here you can see how beautifully clear and sparkly they are, and that foil just looks really nice. So now we're going to talk about the pigment pastes that I didn't have on hand. They arrived after I recorded that. This is them. So we're going to make a set here, a couple of sets, I think, and see what we've got. Now let me just pop this open here, and I want to show you how thick this stuff is. So I'm going to scrape or stir it up with my mixer here, my little coffee stirrer, and then I'm going to lay it down there, and I'm using Duo Paduo, I'm not sure how you pronounce that, resin this time around. I tested it out. I didn't really like it, just the thickness of it. It was too thick for me, and tends to be prone to bubbles. This one does like almost fully cure in 10 hours. So just a note, if you're using that resin, it does cure pretty quick and can be prone to bubbles even with a pressure pot. That is a feature of very quick curing resins, by the way. So just to take a look at this stir stick, when I pick it up with the orange pigment paste on there, it has not dripped whatsoever onto my mat. And I'll pick it up and I'll do a little wipe for you as a demonstration. And just take note of the amounts that I'm using. So you can see here, like there's none on the mat. It's still pretty evenly coated on my little stir stick. And I'm gonna stir this in, and we're gonna get a really nice dark orange resin. And it does not give any cure inhibition problems when these dice are done. They look really great, which you'll see them in a few minutes here. Thanks to the magic of editing. And I'm gonna dirty pour with that gold alcohol ink. And you can see, as I'm wiping this off here, just how much dye or paste was still left on there. So we're just gonna fill the molds up here. Oh, I dropped it in. I forgot about that. I dropped it in and it turned out fine. It didn't clog it or anything. I was able to wipe it all off. No big deal. Didn't ruin anything. So just drop another drop in there, pour these in, fill that bad boy up, and then we'll pop this in the pressure pot. But I do have a little bit of resin left, so we're not gonna let anything go to waste here. We'll mix up another set and we'll see what a little bit less paste does in a set. So this one is bubblegum pink. Again, I'm holding things upside down. Do I remember to flip it this time? Oh, look at me. There we go. Bubblegum pink. And I'm going to use quite a bit less this time. And you can see it looks kind of orangey. A lot of the pigment pastes in the package all look very samey with different names. And I want you to, you'll see the difference here once they're all mixed up, but I'm just going to use a little bit, and I smeared it all over the mat there. The amount was far less than what I used for the orange set, and the color ends up being semi-transparent, but you'll see. So I'm just gonna take what's left of this orange, and it's close to the end of the working time for this resin. Remember, I was telling you this stuff thickens up pretty quick. So I just kind of smeared it in around the molds, and it gives it a really cool splotchy, kind of spotted look. And we're gonna pop these in, and here they are, all back out already. These are the orange set that I did the dirty pour with, the gold metallic alcohol inks. And it gave it a really nice little gold swirl in there, but check out the richness of this color. And if I hadn't put the sparkly metallic alcohol ink in there, these would be just a solid flat orange. Very pretty. Perfect for Halloween. And then I followed that up. Oh, to note, it did stain the mold. This can pretty easily be cleaned with some IPA, not the kind you get at the bar, the kind you use for wounds, and it should come right out. So this here is the other set with the pink, bubblegum pink paste that I didn't use quite as much, and the leftover orange. And you can see in comparison, as they're next to each other in these dice, how opaque the orange is versus the pink. The pink is almost transparent. Let me just give you a closer look here. Come on, camera, work with me. You can see how dark the orange is versus the pink. And you can kind of see through the pink a little bit. You can see some of the numbers through. So a little bit can give you some kind of transparency. And there you have it. 2 sets made with pigment paste. Your best friend if you want vivid colors and opaque dice. So let's review. First, we have our alcohol ink. the alcohol ink and the glitter set. Gave us a nice light transparent color. You can use these to get beautiful Petri effects and really pretty pastel colors that are still transparent. Then we have our resin dye and the gold foil. Our resin dyes give us very highly pigmented colors, transparent or non-opaque. Then we've got our mica sets. These will almost always be semi-transparent to opaque and real sparklies. Then last but not least, we have our paste, and those give us some flat colors. We can make them sparkly by adding a little bit of ink or mica if we want to, and or using them lightly to get transparent. So there you have it, all the ways you can color your dice, and a few extra non-traditional ways, shall we say. So I do link all of these products that I used in the description if you're in need of any of those. And if you love these dice and you want them, I just throw them in the shop when I'm done because my hoard is full. So thank you so much for watching. Remember to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye, guys.